Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, in part because I have a sweet spot for talking about things that people don't talk about. So I really do love this. Just to sort of frame the discourse here, I'm making a case that business as business actually serves a social justice function by virtue of the nature of what business actually does. Right? That's the basic premise. One of the reasons that I initially got involved in thinking about the intersection of the marketplace and justice and mercy is after having some experience sitting on a number of boards and listening to people who were 30, 40 years my senior, retired from corporate America, and now sitting on boards making decisions about all sorts of organizations, and sort of hearing this one man once, he retired as a senior VP of a Fortune 500 company, and I remember him saying this because I have a vein that pops out of my head when I get really irritated, and it sort of launched out, and I almost reached across the table and tried to choke him, and I wanted to shake him at least. But this is what he said. He said that now that I'm retired from this company, I can finally do some work for the Lord. Right? I mean, now that I've worked for 25, 30 years at this corporation, I can finally now do something for the kingdom. And that's when the veins, sort of popped out of my head, because I thought, wow, what a wasted opportunity to understand the nature of your vocation for 25 or 30 years, that you actually were doing something for the kingdom your entire career, right? Not just because you're now on the board of this Christian nonprofit that you're doing something for the Lord, but the virtue and nature of your vocation actually had you there, and you didn't realize it. So one of my deep passions is to help those who are in the marketplace understand that the nature of the work that they do is a part of God healing and redeeming the creation. So when I think of marketplace, broadly defined, it is, as I'm going to use it today, the space for free and open exchanges, activities, and mechanisms that function to contribute to the common good. I have this emphasis on the common good. I'll take questions at the end.
Just a question.
Yep.
Will you or would you make your slides available so we know whether we take
Sure.
them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure. You can tattoo some of the things I'm going to say as well. Right? They'll be brilliant. Trust me. So the marketplace defined is a space for free and open exchanges, activities, and mechanisms that function to contribute to the common good. Now, this phrase, the common good, is something that we don't use much anymore. We used to talk a lot about the common good out there, common and good. We today usually talk about what's good for me, or what's good for us, or what's good for my tribe, not the common good. So one of the things I'm beginning to mull over, particularly in the evangelical space, as we talk about transforming, engaging, impacting culture, if the common good is being lost in that discourse, right? Because I'm not certain, I'm thinking this sort of out loud, I'm not certain that our conceptions of transformation, engaging, activating, influencing, impacting is about the common good. I wonder if at times it's actually about our good. So we're thinking about the goods and services, the ideas between parties, groups, individuals, and spheres, and nations. So it's the activity, it's the space in which we inhabit, regardless of our particular vocation. When I think about justice, I'm thinking about it in terms of sustaining context so that human beings are treated according to what it means to bear the image of God, anticipating others to have a transcendent calling on their lives. So when we think about justice, what others are due, we are primarily other-centered. And we are primarily thinking about the fact that every human person that we encounter is a person that has a transcendent calling on their life, and our job, our role, is to point them to their transcendent calling. That we have an opportunity to unlock the mystery of the other person's transcendent vocation. So we're thinking about the marketplace not in terms of simply the interactions between people, but we actually are thinking about it in terms of those people who bear the image and likeness of the triune God, who have a calling on their life. We want to point them to the calling that God would have for them. Cornelius Plantinga has been really helpful in broadening out this understanding of how we think about grace and mercy and peace and shalom. If you haven't read this book, The Way Things Ought to Be, it's really, really fantastic book. He defines shalom this way in the Bible. Shalom means universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight. A rich state of affairs in which natural needs are satisfied and natural gifts fruitfully employed. That inspires joyful wonder as its creator and savior opens doors and welcomes the creatures in whom he delights. So this idea of shalom is connected to flourishing. The flourishing of God's intention for the creation itself, which includes things that we are familiar with in terms of the language of redemption and healing and restoration. But there is a sense, of course, in which this involves naturally joy and delight and love, as we heard this morning. So the marketplace, if you think about the fact that the marketplace includes human persons, that it is a place where those persons can flourish. It is a place where shalom is unlocked and unleashed. The marketplace is the space that is the most powerful weapon against injustice. Why do I say this? Because the only long-term solution to poverty is sustainable job creation and development. That's the only long-term solution to poverty. Charity is not a long-term solution to poverty. Foreign aid is not a long-term solution to poverty. Those are temporary, emergency measures to help people in need. But if we're thinking about what's sustainable over the long term, it's actually as basic as people having jobs. And being in a context in which job creation expands in such a way so that people can have jobs and that their kids can have jobs and that their kids' kids can also have jobs. So the question then is, why do people remain in cycles of poverty and injustice? If we look not only in this country but also around the world, there are people that we may know personally and their entire cultures, entire countries, where people are stuck at the bottom quintile. They remain trapped in cycles of suffering and poverty and marginalization. And the question is, why is this? Well, the Bible actually indicates to us, you see this in the book of Proverbs, these things happen for two reasons. One reason, naturally, is that they're unjust structures, right? That there actually are contexts in which people are under immense oppression. That the system actually is against them. Right? And we've seen examples of this in our own nation's history, right? Where the structure itself, the system itself, the nation itself, was positioned to not provide people opportunity to enter into the marketplace, block them out, kept them out. Well, it's also true that some people in various communities are stuck in cycles of poverty because they don't have better options. The sociologists call this spatial mismatch, where there is a need for employment, but the jobs aren't there. So the only options are to take the jobs that are actually around them, which in a lot of low-income areas tend to be in the service industry and retail, things like that. Right? Whereas the sort of low-skilled labor market jobs might be 15 or 20 miles or 30 miles outside of where the people are who need the job. So there's some mismatch there. But internationally, it's also true that people are sometimes in spaces where, in contexts where there simply are no entry-level sorts of jobs that can begin the process of allowing people to sustain themselves and their families. There just are not enough options. I put the word India there to remind me to tell a story. I've had the privilege over the years of being involved in lots of justice-oriented activities, including rescuing people from slavery, bonded labor slavery in India. It was a wonderful experience of being able to physically remove people from slavery. I was like, I'm an abolitionist. You know? This is what it was like. One of the most awesome things I've ever done. In India, there is now developing something that we have in this country called the middle class. And what's fascinating about the middle class is that the middle class is actually waging war against bonded labor slavery. It's the middle class that's putting an end to bonded labor slavery because the elites are perfectly okay with it. Right? The elites they're totally cool with having people be in slavery because of the caste system. Like, well, sucks for them. Right? So when you call that customer service line, and the person's name is, John, and you're thinking, you don't sound like the other Johns I know. That accent's really thick. And you're talking, and you're like, John, where are you? Are you from Kansas? And you're like, John, you're not really from Kansas. And John's actually in India. What's happening is that those call centers are paying people fairly good wages, and they are doing something called buying machines. And these machines are actually being used on in rock quarries, in cigarette factories, the kinds of things that slaves used to do. Children used to roll cigarettes and things like that. Well, these entrepreneurial middle class people who are taking the money from these call centers, things like that, and buying machines, the machines are putting the slaves out of business, if you will, right? Because it's actually cheaper to have a machine than a slave. And so as the middle class grows in India, as people have more capacity to buy machines, it's actually eliminating the demand for slaves. So it's actually the development of more jobs, it's job creation that's fueling a justice movement inadvertently in countries like India. So it's providing people much better options. Right now, they can work they can work in factories with the machines rather than being slaves. Their children now can go to school because they're being better paid, not by bonded labor slavery, which is a situation whereby you borrow money, you owe a debt, your interest rate's like 50%, you can never pay it off. Right? It frees them from that bonded labor slavery context because now there are more options. So as the middle class grows, as there's more economic development in countries like India, it's actually providing people the capital that they need and can use to put the slavery industry out of business. So why are marketplace innovators vital for justice and shalom? I am convinced of this, that it's the marketplace innovators that are the lead visionaries for creating sustainable peace and flourishing in civil society. So they're important because I believe, and this isn't going to be news for this crowd, that work is central to our flourishing. We have a duty to cultivate and care for the earth. Work, as we know, precedes the fall. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took man and put him in the garden to work it and take care of it. So work, the opportunity to work is a blessing to us to be able to do that by God. So we praise him and we thank him for opportunities to work. So on Sunday, part of our praise is that we get to go to work tomorrow. Right? I tell my students, you get to do homework this week, right? And study and read all these pages in these books. It's fabulous, right? Work is a source, of course, of a decent life against poverty. It's really that simple. What keeps people out of poverty? Jobs. So we have a duty then to cultivate and care for the earth, which is a part of what it means to be truly human. Jesus himself, of course, humanizes work for us. Jesus teaches that we should appreciate work. It's interesting that Jesus was first known as one associated with his sort of secular earthly vocation, right? He starts preaching on the scene, and people are saying, wait, isn't this that carpenter guy? What's he doing talking about the scriptures? He's just a carpenter, right? And actually, that Greek word for carpenter is actually more properly translated. The most direct equivalent is actually construction worker, right? That's what he did. And so think about this, right? Imagine this, right? You're at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. And Tim Keller calls him and says, we have a guest speaker today. It's John, the construction worker. Right? And people are like, oh, please, seriously? Come on, Tim Keller. You're not going to have this construction worker from Brooklyn come up here and talk about and unpack the scripture. So that was part of the reaction, is because Jesus was properly first known according to his vocation. That isn't just the carpenter. Well, Jesus, as you know, spent most of his life, right, operating within the context of this vocation. So he teaches us that we should appreciate work, because that's basically what he did for most of his earthly life. Jesus models unlocking the perfections in the creation. It is a part theologically of his role as co-creator, as a part of the Trinity at the creation, right? Jesus was there. Through him, it says in John chapter 1, verse 3, through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. So within the context of what we read in Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, the second person of the Trinity and the third person of the Trinity was also there, participating with God the Father in the creation of all things, ta panta in the Greek. So the work of Christ as creator continues with respect to him, his role in the second person of the Trinity, unlocking the perfections that are embedded in the creation. We also see that work is participation in the act of redemption and expresses our full humanity. So if you think about it in terms of Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 28, that we are made in God's image. And what that means is that when we work, we have opportunities to fully participate in what it means to be human, because we are engaging in the act of creating. We are engaging in the act of sustaining. And by definition, we then participate in the fullness of what it means to be truly human. To be truly human in light of our primary vocation, which is to be men and women who live out what it means to be the image and likeness of God. In the Christian tradition, there is a distinction between two types of work. The Christian tradition has focused on opus servile versus opus humanum. Opus servile is work as servitude. That's thinking, unfortunately, being engaged in work that is more coercive work. You might think of it in terms of slavery or indentured servitude, bonded labor slavery. That is a form of work. But the Christian tradition wants to orient the church, orient God's people toward thinking about work as primarily service. Work in the service of humanity. To be engaged in work because it allows us to be generous with our time, our talent, and our treasure, that we lose ourselves within the context of work because it, in fact, allows us to be generous. 1 Peter 4:10, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. I am convinced that one of the reasons so many of my students are having anxiety attacks about their future in terms of their major career is that they're thinking about it, they're actually conceptualizing their futures more in terms of living out their own self-actualization within the culture, as opposed to thinking about serving the needs of the common good. So when you ask them, what do you want to do when you get out of college, they go, I don't know. Well, what needs are out in the marketplace that need to be met, that need to be served, that need to be addressed? What problems do we find in the world that need some virtuous people addressing them, in the midst of them? I'm just wondering what it's like to sort of think about entering the university space, the college space, with a passion and being driven for service. To think about your intellect and your gifts and your talents, not for the service of your own personal career, not for the service of your future retirement fund, not necessarily for the service of the self-promotion and the self-congratulatory, self-aggrandizement, a status of saying, I'm a Christian over here in this sort of non-Christian space. But thinking about it more in terms of using the gifts that God has given me for the purpose of serving other people. That is why I have intellect. That is why I have talents and gifts and interests. It's not for me, it's for them. It's for the common good. So I'm again more convinced that my students are wrapped up and stressed out about their futures because education for them has been more of a means of achieving self-actualization, as opposed to a means of clarifying the ways in which they can be servants, as Christ came to serve, right? He came to serve, not to be served. The Christian tradition also has distinctions between the subjective and objective dimensions of work. The objective dimension is the sum of the activities and resources that we use to exercise dominion. You might think of that as the hardware. So there is the objective dimension, which includes our laptops and desks and buildings and the chairs that we sit in, etc. That we use these things, the tools that we use to exercise dominion is the objective dimension. There's also the subjective dimension, which is the self-actualizing effect of work, recognizing that not only when we are engaged in work are we doing something, but work is actually doing something to us. Okay? It's a variation on the theme that we heard this morning. It actually affects us. Our bodies are actually involved and engaged in our work, so our work actually has an effect on our habits. It has an effect on our passions. It's formative. This is one of the reasons why in the Christian tradition there has been an emphasis on keeping people away from immoral forms of work. Because those immoral forms of work actually have an effect on people. So we want people to be in the types of vocations, the types of jobs where their humanity and their dignity is being ennobled, where it's being enhanced, where it's being cultivated toward what God intended it to be. So when we think about just forms of work, if you're a manager, a director, a CEO, you're thinking about whether or not the tasks that you have people involved in, is it actually bringing them dignity? Is it actually honoring the fact that they're made in the image and likeness of God? If it is not, perhaps that form of work is immoral if it's not ennobling human dignity. Work is intrinsically social and developmental. We are by nature social creatures. We are born into communities. We're not like sea turtles where you hatch from an egg and good luck. God has made us in His image, and by definition it means that we are intrinsically social beings. We're born into communities, and we are formed and shaped by families, and we're formed and shaped by neighborhoods and churches and schools. And this also has an effect on forming us to be truly human. So we work with others, we work for others, we collaborate, we cooperate. Even the person that has a job in cubicle land is still collaborating and cooperating with other people toward a larger goal. We maintain and develop one's humanity within the context of being in deep connection and community with other people. We actually can't be truly human without being connected with other people. That our understanding of what it means to be made in the image of God is not individualistic. The nature of what it means to be made in the image of God is necessarily social and corporate, because there is no one individual that has the capacity to bear that image. In fact, one theologian, Herman Bavinck, observes that our understanding of what it means to be made in the image of God is fully expressed when we, as God's people, are doing the things that God created us to do. We put on display what the image of God looks like together as a community. So when people when people see the people of God, they see the image of God in what's happening corporately and socially within the context of God's people. So work is another opportunity for us to express our humanity as social creatures, as developmental beings within the context of deep community. Pope John Paul II has a fantastic encyclical on work, Laborum Exercens, where he He says this: through work, man must earn his daily bread and contribute to the continual advance of science and technology, and above all, to elevating unceasingly the cultural and moral level of the society within which he lives, in community with those who belong to the same family. Work is one of the characteristics that distinguish man from the rest of creatures, whose activity for sustaining their lives cannot be called work. Squirrels don't work. Thus, work bears a particular mark of man and of humanity, the mark of a person orienting within a community of persons. Again, this intrinsically social dimension of work, where work is an aspect of unlocking the perfections in the creation as God continues to create today. And to be co-creators with God in the work of creating and sustaining the creation. Work is actually then necessary. Excuse me. Work is necessary. It's not an option. Right? That it is so constitutive to what it means to be a human person that we actually have to work. We were created to be involved in activity. This is why we get bored. I don't ever remember, I'm trying to remember, I had lots of dogs when I was growing up. And it was on rare occasion that I would imagine my dog being bored. Dogs do what dogs do. They sleep, they eat, they destroy your grass, and when you want to play, they play. When you don't want to play, they sleep. They're perfectly content to do whatever you want to do. But bored? Not sure my dogs were bored. So work is a necessary extension of what it means to be human, so much so that it's a necessary part of what it means to form and maintain a family. There's a lot of recent data that's indicated that for college students, for college males, a lot of them are resistant to actually dating because they don't have a firm economic plan for their first few years of college. So because they don't have that, they actually don't date. There's data on this, right? So these girls are wondering, how come these guys won't ask me out? Well, because a lot of these guys say, well, I don't know what I'm going to do when I'm 23, 24, 25, so I'm not even going to start the process. Part of that is a good impulse, right? Because you kind of need a job to form and maintain a family. It's also good, of course, in relation to that, to understand that the family is the first place where children learn about the value of work as service. So this is one of the reasons why when I did youth ministry, I always tell parents, please do not ever give your children cash for chores. That is the worst thing you can do in terms of teaching your children about the nature of work. And they look at me weird, and their kids hate it when I say this, right? Like, oh. Why do I say this? Because what you're teaching your children when you give them cash for doing the dishes or mowing the lawn is that the purpose of work is money, right? That the reason that you're doing these things in this house, in this community, is for the sole purpose of being remunerated for it. And I tell parents, listen, don't you want your children to do the dishes and clean the bathroom and the gutters and mow the lawn because they love your family? They want to babysit their siblings because they love them. They actually want to help out after dinner in the kitchen, not because they're getting paid, but because they want to serve the flourishing of your family. They want to serve your family. They love your family. And they know that their participation in serving the family by doing the chore, I don't even like to use that word chore, right? They have an opportunity to keep the family going, right? yay family, right? It's an opportunity to sort of cheerlead the flourishing of your family because you get to help out, you get to help us. There's also tons of data that indicates you actually want your kids to ask you for money because it keeps them accountable. But that's a totally different talk. Right? So in order for work to be what it's designed to be in civil society, it's understood in the Christian tradition that there is a necessary role for private property because property is the context in which work is originated and developed and sustained and also grows, right? As people have opportunities to exchange the things that they have with others within the context of free and mutual exchange. So work is necessary also because it contributes to the common good of the whole human family. When we have societies where there's lots of employment, where people are working in various sectors, the various jobs that people are doing within the context of the marketplace actually serving the flourishing of the common good itself. They're not simply doing their job, and we'll see this in the video a little later, they're actually serving the needs of their local community together with other people who are doing the exact same thing. So work is a necessary part of the flourishing and sustaining of local communities. It's also a catalyst for dignity. Dr. Robert Kennedy, not of the Kennedy family, in a short little book called The Good That Business Does, observes this: that authentic human dignity requires that conditions be created and nurtured that permit people to care for themselves. So allowing people to meet their needs and the needs of their families is an opportunity to validate, affirm, and celebrate their own dignity. So we need more and more opportunities for people to be able to do just that. The marketplace is a context then for supporting justice. Work then becomes a part of the natural law. It's a part of the created order. It is a norm of the creation itself. Justice and the common good then depend on employment opportunities. That is, people need opportunities to work and to take care of themselves and their families, and they need those in an ever-growing fashion. And so unemployed people and underemployed people can experience profound dehumanization. This is one of the reasons why during financial crises, people actually commit suicide. Because when they're disconnected from work, they often lose a will to live. Why live? Why be human? We've seen contexts where people are in such sustained periods of unemployment, they actually begin to participate in activities that dehumanize themselves and their families. So as a justice mechanism, we should be passionate about making sure that people have opportunities to be employed. There's a fantastic business in Cleveland. It's a restaurant whose target sort of justice arm, if you want to call it that, is to hire ex-offenders, train them how to be chefs, and then send them off into Cleveland to work in restaurants. And what this restaurant, it's a if you go to CNN's website, their 2016 CNN Heroes, you'll see this model explained. These men come out of prison, these men and women come out of prison, they learn how to be chefs, they get a trade, they learn a good skill, they then go off in Cleveland. These are 4 or 5-star restaurants, and you know what happens? None of them end up back in jail. 0. Why? Because they're so humanized by being given a chance, by being given opportunity, that they then reorient everything about their lives and they flourish. They're humanized in the process. This also requires an education and training. So people need to have the tools necessary to make contributions to the common good in terms of the marketplace. People need skills. So education is a good thing. Being trained, learning are also very good. So then who leads the culture in job creation with a divine calling to do so? Well, I argue that in fact it is entrepreneurs and marketplace leaders. That it is an extremely high calling to be a marketplace leader. It's a weighty responsibility because you are bringing peace and justice to the world by creating and sustaining opportunities for people to be employed, by creating and sustaining opportunities for people to be humanized within the context of their work, for you to use your creativity to make your workspace, your company, your business, your community thrive within the context of creating opportunities for more and more employment, actually humanizes people, because this is the basis, not just for stable society, but for the basis of establishing family. That first community that forms and shapes our virtues and values and our dignity. And so it's an extremely high calling. So when I talk to business groups, I tell them, hey, if you're not good at this, get out of it and go work for someone who is good at it. It's okay to be a worker bee. You don't have to be the head guy, right, or the head girl. It's all right. Because it's such a high calling that you cannot fail. Because there is so much on the line if you fail. So do it with profound, almost reckless abandon in terms of intensity, because you're not simply just starting a business. You're not simply sort of meeting needs in the marketplace. You're providing opportunities for people to experience their full humanity. That you are facilitating shalom in your community. That you are facilitating justice and mercy. That you are putting an end to injustice. That you are putting an end to the sorts of things that undermine the flourishing of individuals and their families. So please, 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 do this and do it really, really well. So it means, as I mentioned earlier, by definition, that business as is, as by design, is a justice opportunity. Robert Kennedy notes, more recently, the church has given sustained attention to the special situation of business corporations. Two papal encyclicals in the 20th century, Cordatium Annu and Centesimus Annus, explicitly discuss the role of business organizations in society. Both documents emphasize that it is legitimate for businesses to make a profit, but they also insist that the fundamental rule governing the conduct of businesses is that they serve the common good. Neither document, however, suggests that business corporations have a social responsibility that goes beyond this, even in passages where this could be quite naturally discussed. Why do they not need to go beyond that? Because the nature of what it means to be a business is actually serving the common good in such a way that it is expanding and exploding and ballooning more human dignity so that people can understand and truly experience the sorts of shalom that God intends in the creation itself. So you don't have to join a special cause. That regular, boring, humdrum business actually is, by definition, a justice movement. You don't have to go to work for 30 or 40 years and then at the end say, I'm now going to do something for the kingdom. By being in the context of the marketplace and flourishing and leading and creating people to be what it means to be truly human, that you are actually a social justice warrior. You are actually putting faith in action by being a good manager, a good director, a good CEO, a good COO. That in your cubicle, you don't realize it, but that's actually what you're doing. So teachers, parents, lawyers, psychologists, nurses, politicians, even politicians, all contribute to allowing people to work and contribute to the common good. You don't have to do anything outside of that to promote the common good. So it means that we need to rethink globalization, right? That these are more and more opportunities for us to unlock human dignity as business flourishes and develops across our borders. That we can think about this in terms of importing and exporting opportunities for wealth creation, because wealth creation is a context in which jobs flourish, jobs are created, jobs are sustained, jobs are maintained, and these are all certainly the birthplace of human dignity and human flourishing. So on Monday, if you live in New York and you're on the 4-5 train, this is your life. And you're on the 4-5 train, headed downtown to go to work, and you're ecstatic, right? Because you are about to get off the 4-5 train on Canal Street and walk into a building and sit down at a desk or a cubicle or stand at your desk if you have one of those desk standing contraption things that's pretty cool now with like a padded floor under your feet. You're one of those things. You are about to engage in the activity of expanding and honoring and ennobling human dignity by the virtue of what happens on the tips of your fingers. How awesome is that? And so Christians don't live for Friday, right? We don't have like TGIF. And why would you go to Friday dinner? Because the food's really disgusting, right? It's just really gross, right? So it's not for us, it's not thank God it's Friday. For us, it's thank God it's Monday. Because on Monday morning, you get to wake up and get dressed and leave your house, apartment, cottage, tent, wherever you live, and you get to participate in the flourishing of your business, which contributes to the flourishing of your community, and by extension, more and more people are able to experience, when it's done in a virtuous way, what it means to be truly human. So may you, whatever vocation you're in, this weekend, begin the process of reimagining what it means for you to be in that space, recognizing that God has you there for the purpose of participating in the flourishing of Shalom, and that you are deeply engaged in that work at your desk, and that the work that you are doing is good, that God smiles upon it because it is holy and it is sanctified activity because of what it does for the human person and the common good. Thank you very much for your time.